2 military executions. In the spring of the year 1862, General Buell's big army lay in camp, licking itself into shape for the campaign which resulted in the victory at Shiloh. It was a raw, untrained army, although some of its fractions had seen hard enough service, with a good deal of fighting in the mountains of western Virginia and in Kentucky. The war was young, and soldiering a new industry, imperfectly understood by the young American of the period, who found some features of it not altogether to his liking. Chief among these was that essential part of discipline, subordination. To one imbued from infancy with the fascinating fallacy that all men are born equal, unquestioning submission to authority is not easily mastered, and the American volunteer soldier, in his green and salad days, is among the worst known. That is how it happened that one of Buell's men, Private Bennett Story Green, committed the indiscretion of striking an officer. Later in the war, he would not have done that. Like Sir Andrew Aguecheek, he would have seen him damned first. But time for reformation of his military manners was denied him. He was promptly arrested on complaint of the officer, tried by court-martial, and sentenced to be shot. "He might have thrashed me and let it go at that," said the condemned man to the complaining witness. "That is what you used to do at school when you were playing Will Dudley and I was as good as you. Nobody saw me strike you. Discipline would not have suffered much." "Ben Green, I guess you're right about that," said the lieutenant. "Will you forgive me? That is what I came to see you about." There was no reply, and an officer putting his head in at the door of the guard tent where the conversation had occurred explained that the time allowed for the interview had expired. The next morning, when in the presence of the whole brigade, Private Green was shot to death by a squad of his comrades, Lieutenant Dudley turned his back upon the sorry performance and muttered a prayer for mercy in which he himself was included. A few weeks afterwards, as Buell's leading division was being ferried across the Tennessee River to assist in succoring Grant's beaten army, night was coming on, black and stormy. Through the wreck of battle, the division moved, inch by inch, in the direction of the enemy, who had withdrawn a little to reform his lines. But for the lightning, the darkness was absolute. Never for a moment did it cease, and ever when the thunder did not crack and roar, were heard the moans of the wounded among whom the men felt their way with their feet, and upon whom they stumbled in the gloom. The dead were there too. There were dead aplenty. In the first faint gray of the morning, when the swarming advance had paused to resume something of definition as a line of battle, and skirmishers had been thrown forward, word was passed along to call the roll. The first sergeant of Lieutenant Dudley's company stepped to the front and began to name the men in alphabetical order. He had no written roll, but a good memory. The men answered to their names as he ran down the alphabet to G. "Gorham?" "Here." "Grayrock?"
"Here."
The sergeant's good memory was affected by habit. "Green?" "Here." The response was clear, distinct, unmistakable. A sudden movement, an agitation of the entire company front, as from an electric shock, attested the startling character of the incident. The sergeant paled and paused. The captain strode quickly to his side and said sharply, "Call that name again." Apparently, the Society for Physical Research is not the first in the field of curiosity concerning the unknown. "Bennett Green." "Here." All faces turned in the direction of the familiar voice. The two men between whom, in the order of stature, Green had commonly stood in line, turned and squarely confronted each other. "Once more," commanded the inexorable investigator, and once more came, a trifle tremulously, the name of the dead man. "Bennett Story Green?" "Here." At that instant, a single rifle shot was heard, away to the front, beyond the skirmish line, followed, almost attended, by the savage hiss of an approaching bullet, which, passing through the line, struck audibly, punctuating, as with a full stop, the captain's exclamation, "What the devil does it mean?" Lieutenant Dudley pushed through the ranks from his place in the rear. "It means this," he said, throwing open his coat and displaying a visibly broadening stain of crimson on his breast. His knees gave way. He fell awkwardly and lay dead. A little later, the regiment was ordered out of line to relieve the congested front, and through some misplay in the game of battle was not again under fire. Nor did Bennett Green, expert in military executions, ever again signify his presence at one. End of 2 military executions.
A cold greeting. In the summer of 1881, I met a man named James H. Conway, a resident of Franklin, Tennessee. He was visiting San Francisco for his health, deluded man, and brought me a note of introduction from Mr. Lawrence Barting. I had known Barting as a captain in the Federal Army during the Civil War. At its close, he had settled in Franklin and in time became, I had reason to think, somewhat prominent as a lawyer. Barting had always seemed to me an honorable and truthful man, and the warm friendship which he expressed in his note for Mr. Conway was to me sufficient evidence that the latter was in every way worthy of my confidence and esteem. At dinner one day, Conway told me that it had been solemnly agreed between him and Barting that the one who died first should, if possible, communicate with the other from beyond the grave, in some unmistakable way. Just how they had left, wisely it seemed to me, to be decided by the deceased, according to the opportunities that his altered circumstances might present. A few weeks after the conversation in which Mr. Conway spoke of this agreement, I met him one day, walking slowly down Montgomery Street, apparently, from his abstract air, in deep thought. He greeted me coldly, with merely a movement of the head, and passed on, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, with half-proffered hand, surprised and naturally somewhat piqued. The next day I met him again in the office of the Palace Hotel, and seeing him about to repeat the disagreeable performance of the day before, intercepted him in the doorway, with a friendly salutation, and bluntly requested an explanation of his altered manner. He hesitated a moment, and then looking at me frankly in the eyes, said, "I do not think, Mr. Foley, that I have any longer a claim to your friendship. Since Mr. Barting appears to have withdrawn his own from me, for what reason I protest I do not know. If he has not already informed you, he probably will do so." "But," I replied, "I have not heard from Mr. Barting." "Not heard from him?" he replied, with apparent surprise. "Why, he is here. I met him yesterday 10 minutes before meeting you. I gave you exactly the same greeting that he gave me. I met him again not a quarter of an hour ago, and his manner was precisely the same. He merely bowed and passed on. I shall not soon forget your civility to me. Good morning, or as it may please you, farewell." All this seemed to me singularly considerate and delicate behavior on the part of Mr. Conway. As dramatic situations and literary effects are foreign to my purpose, I will explain at once that Mr. Barting was dead. He had died in Nashville 4 days before this conversation. Calling on Mr. Conway, I appraised him of our friend's death, showing him the letters announcing it. He was visibly affected in a way that forbade me to entertain a doubt of his sincerity. "It seems incredible," he said, after a period of reflection. "I suppose I must have mistaken another man for Barting. And that man's cold greeting was merely a stranger's civil acknowledgment of my own. I remember, indeed, that he lacked Barting's mustache." "Doubtless it was another man," I assented, "and the subject was never afterward mentioned between us. But I had in my pocket a photograph of Barting, which had been enclosed in the letter from his widow. It had been taken a week before his death, and was without a mustache." End of A Cold Greeting.